From the BBC World Service, in association with ABC and Akashvani, this is Stumped.
Hello and welcome to Stumped, your intercontinental hit of news, features and debate from the quirky world of cricket. I'm Alison Mitchell and I'm in London, where I've been a tourist in my home city this week, which is always a bit of fun. I've had a cousin visiting from Australia and I reckon we walked pretty much all of London town in the first day, culminating actually in a game of football soccer at Craven Cottage, home of Fulham. They were taking on Spurs in the League Cup. So there was interest there from an Aussie perspective, of course, with Anya Shrubsole in charge of the Spurs side. So yeah, very much been a tourist this week, and sort of between cricket series at the moment. We're getting into the white ball stuff now that we're into September.
Jim Maxwell in Sydney, still in the cool of winter, but there's a whiff of cricket around the place. Australia played a game in South Africa overnight and looked to have a resounding win with 220 odd runs scored and a big margin of victory under the leadership of Mitch Marsh, and that well-known Singaporean, otherwise an Australian, Tim David, hit the ball out of the ground on a number of occasions. So for what it's worth, in these warm-ups towards whatever event it is they play in the end, it was an emphatic performance by Australia, just as I see it was an emphatic performance by England over New Zealand. So cricket's sort of over there somewhere at the moment in terms of the focus with Australian sport.
Well, much more than a whiff, another flood of cricket in Asia. I'm Charu Sharma for Akashvani, today in Dubai, because the Asia Cup has started. And there was a massive win for Pakistan in the first match against the debutants Nepal. Hopefully they'll fare a little better as they go along. But I'm doing radio in Dubai for a change, big FM and talk radio. Apparently radio is very strong in the Gulf, and I'm quite pleased to be here. And of course, I am in the studios of my hosts here. So far, so good. We've started the tournament, and of course, September, Saturday, a couple of days from now, is the big one, India-Pakistan. That will certainly provide some fire for the Asia Cup, and maybe the two teams will play again later.
Who knows? Yeah, can't wait for that one, Charon. Radio is a special medium, so enjoy that radio commentary, won't you? Now, we're going to start this week with the climax to the 100, the Razzmatazz UK competition, where it's 100 balls a side. It's in its third season, it's just finished, and a record crowd of over 21,600 packed into Lords for the women's final, which was played then just ahead of the men's. I was commentating for BBC TV, and it was third time lucky for Southern Brave in the women's, which meant the most perfect ending for former England fast bowler Anya Shrubsole.
They're looking for the second now. There'll be a run out. This will be the end of the match, and it is! Southern Brave, the 100 champions, the third time of asking. A clinical defence of their total at Lords, and a fairy tale way for Anya Shrubsole to bow out of professional cricket. They've waited and they've waited. Their hearts have been broken in years 1 and 2. And finally they do it.
Yep, that was after losing the first two finals that they featured in the 100. Southern Brave finally clinched that maiden women's 100 title, beating Northern Superchargers by 34 runs at Lords. And that crowd was a record attendance for a women's domestic game in the UK as well. Now, Anya Shrubsole, already an England legend, that was her final match as a professional cricketer, and she once again got her hands on a trophy at the home of cricket, the same ground where she conjured up that famous 6-wicket haul to beat India in 2017 in the 50-over World Cup final. And Anya is with us on Stumped. Anya, great to have you on. What a fairy tale end that was on Sunday. How did you feel then on the day, and how do you feel now?
Yeah, it was absolutely incredible. I couldn't have asked for any more, to be honest. I often say that sport often isn't that kind to kind of give you the ending that you hope for, and so I feel really fortunate that we were able to get over the line on Sunday and cap off what had been an amazing tournament by the whole team.
So we had you on the programme last year after you'd retired from international cricket, 227 wickets in 173 internationals for England. You've been a player coach already in the domestic game. How are you going to be spending your time now going forward? What's the aim?
Just kind of see how things land, to be honest with you. I don't want to rush into something else. I'm obviously stopping doing something that I've done for my entire adult life. So I think just seeing kind of how it lands, having a bit of a break, having a bit of a rest, and just seeing kind of where I want to go next. Like I said, I don't want to rush into things. I want to see what I enjoy, see where my passion is, and kind of go from there.
There's not a lot of women coaches, sort of relatively speaking, in the game yet, is there? There's still quite a lot of males occupying those positions. Does it feel hard as a female coach to get those opportunities? How do you see that land lying?
I'm obviously like pretty new into it and just trying to learn. But I think it's part of the development of the women's game that we're seeing from a playing perspective. I think you're kind of seeing from a women's perspective as well, and it will take some time. I'm a big believer that you should only kind of be offered opportunities and jobs and things like that when you're good enough. I don't think you should get it just because you're a woman or just because you're a man or just because you're whatever. You should get a job if you're good enough to do it. And I'm sure in time there will be plenty of female coaches who are good enough to coach in any team across cricket. And that's kind of where obviously the game wants to get to. And I think we've still got to, it's moving, like I say, from a playing point of view, from a coaching point of view, all of that in the right direction at speed. And I think it will continue to do that. And I've got no doubt, obviously I've worked with Lottie really closely, and I see no reason why in time, if she wanted to, she could coach any cricket team she wanted to around the world. And
Charlotte Edwards,
she'd be able to do that in time if that's what she wanted to do. And equally, she might never want to do that. She might want to stay in the women's game. And I think it's also not seeing the women's game as, I guess, inferior and a stepping stone to the men's game. It's an excellent game in its own right. It's still cricket. It's still top level cricket coaching. So it's. I think we also need to be careful not to see kind of the women's coaching in the women's game as a stepping stone to then the ultimate goal of being coaching in the men's game.
Well, let's get back to that fairy tale spell of yours in 2017 to win the World Cup. That was at Lord's, and here you are back at Lord's finishing it all up. So a special memory, a special place, this ground for you?
It's a pretty special place for any cricketer to go and play. It's obviously iconic. There's so much history. I've been very fortunate to have possibly the top 2 days of my cricket career at that ground. So I feel very lucky that I've been able to, I guess, experience that. I probably couldn't think of a better way to go out.
Yes, we could have a yarn about Jimmy Anderson, but he hasn't retired yet. But what advice might you give him if he's thinking about what he's going to do next over the next 12 months?
I don't think he needs any advice from me, to be honest with you. It seems like he's just going to keep playing forever. It seems like he's got another 10 years till he has to worry about this. But I think obviously there's obviously lots of things within. This is not just Jimmy, full stop. There's lots of things within cricket. He's obviously I've seen him around quite a lot doing commentary during the 100. There's coaching. I don't think Jimmy Anderson will be short of offers of people wanting to tap into his knowledge and things like that when he does finally hang up the boots in 20 years' time.
The other thing which has come out this week has been the increase in match fees for England women players, bringing them in line with the men's England match fees. What's your reaction to that? I know you're out of the game now, but in terms of that move.
Yeah, it's obviously a really important step forward. I think obviously the ICEC report highlighted a lot of things, and that was one of the recommendations. And it's really encouraging to see that that's kind of been taken up pretty quickly, and it's just another step in the right direction. And I think you'll keep seeing that in the years to come. Women's game is moving forward, and it's moving forward at pace. As it should do, and there's still a long way to go, but everything's moving in the right direction, definitely here in England, in some countries around the world, and I guess the hope is that some of the other countries who are maybe lagging behind as well will kind of pick up the pace as well, because I think one of the most important things is having a really strong game globally, and I think that's how women's cricket as a whole moves forward.
And some of those England players will benefit in this series starting now, won't they, against Sri Lanka, that's ongoing. Although some players are being rested. Is this a sign of things to come as well? Because we get that in the men's game, but for the women's game to be resting international players already, in some sense, seems sort of very, very early to be doing that, because the volume of cricket is not quite as intense as the men's. Of course, it is intense for some more than others, but how do you feel that will pan out going forward? And is it the right thing to be resting international players almost in order to have them fresh for their next franchise tournament?
I think it's a really tricky balance, to be honest with you. I can only speak from my point of view. There's no way I would want to. You'd have to really convince me to miss international cricket, because for me that is the absolute pinnacle. But we've seen in the men's game, and it's going to come into the women's game now, there are more franchise tournaments. Obviously, those franchise tournaments are pretty lucrative, kind of when you look at the WPL, and obviously the salaries in the WBBL have gone up, and so it's going to be a challenge for sure. I think the one benefit it will bring is widening that talent pool of England players. I would say probably in years gone by, kind of looking back 5-10 years, that pool was quite shallow, and there probably wasn't enough succession planning for when people did retire or people were injured and things like that. So I think the benefit of it is a good one. You'll get to see a lot more players. You'll get to widen that talent pool. You'll have, when people retire, actually what you'll have is people stepping in who have played 20, 30 games of international cricket already, which I think is a good thing. And I guess you're not able to do that if you don't kind of rest a few people here and there. So it is a real kind of balancing act. But I think what is important is that international cricket is preserved, because for me personally, that is the pinnacle. That's kind of why you want to play. And I still think in the women's game, if you're not playing consistent, good international cricket, I think your players will find themselves dropping out of the kind of conscious for the kind of franchise tournaments pretty quickly.
It's their shop window.
Exactly. I still think the international game is the shop window for these franchise tournaments. So I guess that's the balance that players have got to consider when having these discussions.
Always great to get your thoughts, Anya, on a range of topics. Love having you on. Congratulations on the 100, but also just a fabulous career, the longevity of it and everything that you've achieved as well. So look forward to seeing plenty more of you around the game.
Thank you so much.
History was made this week. Sunil Narine, the Trinbago Knight Riders spinner, made unwanted history by becoming the first cricketer to receive a red card during a Caribbean Premier League match. Now, the CPL Tournament Operations Director is Michael Hall, and he had said in a statement prior to the start of the tournament that they'd been disappointed that their T20 games had been getting longer and longer each year. He says, "We want to do what we can to arrest this trend." And so one of these rules was introduced. It was to bring in red cards, a first in the game in men's and women's competitions, to combat slow over rates, to make sure that teams are bowling the overs that they have to bowl in the mandated 85 minutes in this case. The sanction means that a team loses a player from the field. That player is selected by the captain, and they must have 6 fielders then up inside the circle. They lose 1 fielder from the team altogether. So, Jim Charu, what do you reckon to it?
All these things are worth trying. Now, whether it's the fielding side always, as we saw in the Ashes series, that it's to blame for slow over rates. Batsmen get in the way of this too by mucking around with changes of gloves and other things. I don't know whether that happens as much in the speedy form of the game, but yeah, I'd like to see it tried and see what impact it has. If it has the necessary impact of getting people to keep the game moving, that's fine. If they get to the point of Test cricket, that could be very interesting. I had a good chat to Simon Torfel the other day, and he said one of the problems with Test cricket in particular is that the umpires in the middle aren't umpiring. They're really leaving every decision that matters to the bloke upstairs. And that has a fair bit to do with the fact that they don't have the best umpires doing the better games, because they've got to have a limit of 2 from each country on the panel. So you got a few things going into this, but essentially I like the idea on a trial basis. Yes, let's do it.
Wow, Jim, I'm very impressed with your generosity, because I thought you'd jumped all over the other way and say, what are all these cards doing in cricket? But, I also tend to agree. Mind you, the only problem is the relative subjectivity of somebody with the stop clock. Because who's going to decide what is a legitimate delay and what is not? So that will continue to be contentious. But I like the fact that somebody's trying to take control rather than just allowing this, football-style delay, because it just serves no purpose. I mean, the fans may not mind too much, honestly. It's probably just the television companies which are a little upset at the time going over. On one hand, of course, you have to argue, what's the problem if the match gets a little delayed? Because if television's happy to show it, just keep showing it. On the other hand, of course, if you want to be really strict, then there have to be such measures. And hopefully they're passed by the cricketing community as well, the current cricketers, because their buy-in is important. And if that's been done, then, I don't see a problem whether it's cards which are very visible. So at least there's something visibly being done on the field rather than some backroom negotiation. And you get to hear the next day that there's been some kind of, fine or whatever. So on-the-spot treatment is pretty dramatic. And I think if the intention is to keep the timelines pretty tight, well, then that's the way to go.
I just wasn't sure about the language around it, because I get I quite enjoy that sense of drama about particularly the captain having to select which fielder goes off. I mean, how embarrassing is that going to be? You're the one picked by the captain, say, yep, you're dispensable, off you go. But the idea of the red card, I guess because it's so prevalent in football, when I first saw the headline, Sunil Narine sent off, red card, I thought, what's he done? What terrible misdemeanor has he committed? unwanted, that he's been sent off. So I think that language should change, because that's it's a bit misleading in the headline. So I'm sure someone can come up with something, whether it's not a substitution, but I don't know, a removal from the field, or there'll be something that somebody can think of. But what about, do you think this could be introduced, Charu, in the IPL? Because matches in the IPL just stretch on and on, don't they?
Absolutely. I think it'll be a great addition. The crowd will love it. I'm sure the people consuming cricket will love it, because it does give that sense of discipline and does cause a little bit of, if I may use the term, controversy, which is always useful for any form of the game, for the media to crunch and everybody else. About a player being red carded, perhaps it could be the team. The team's been shown a red card and so-and-so has been removed off the field. Maybe that's one way out, so that the team bears the responsibility as they should. But yeah, it's a good thing. I mean, any and all kinds of cricket should include a visible, instant system rather than some backroom, God knows what kind of decision taken later. So this is preferable for sure.
Curran Pollard, the skipper of the Knight Riders, was not happy with what happened. I mean, and this is where everything gets fired up and it creates headlines and it's a talking point, isn't it? You see the passion. But yeah, he's labelled that new rule as absolutely ridiculous, saying that he thinks it will just take away all the hard work everyone has done. But then, work harder at playing quicker.
I do want to go back to the subjectivity of it, because, I mean, they're playing a hard game, the cricketers these days. And, in terms of a minor or major injury, who's to decide when it starts and how much time is consumed? And even the batsman, I mean, you don't want to refuse them a pair of new gloves, because the bat might fly away, the bat might turn in the hand, you get no second chances, you get caught somewhere just because the gloves are somewhat squelchy and you don't get to replace them. I mean, there's so many other considerations. So, I mean, this has to be really well thought out and extremely well mathematically arranged. Otherwise, there's too much subjectivity.
Well, that's all we've got time for on this week's Stumped here on Akashvani. Don't forget you can follow us on Twitter. We're at BBCWS Sport. Use the hashtag BBC Stumped and check us out on YouTube as well. Go to the BBC World Service's YouTube channel. My thanks to Charu Sharma and Jim Maxwell, and to all of you for listening. Speak to you soon. Bye-bye.
Stumped is a BBC Sport production for the BBC World Service in association with ABC and Akashvani.